Hi, I'm Michael P. Coleman, Content Director for Brother Be Well. Thanking you for checking out this Parents and Caregiver series brought to you by Blue Shield of California's Blue Sky Initiative. Hi, I'm Michael P. Coleman, Content Director for Brother Be Well. Adults, children, and seniors with a serious mental health or emotional disorder often lead lives characterized by significant crises. Sometimes those crises are current, but they're not consequences of mental disability. Rather, they represent the combined impact of a host of factors, including other health problems, coexisting substance abuse, lack of access to essential services and supports, poverty, unstable housing, and discrimination. Additionally, homelessness, police contact, institutionalization, and other adverse events are in themselves crises, and they may contribute to further crises. That's a lot of crises for a household to manage. So today, we're outlining methods and strategies for responding to a household in crisis. And to help us with this conversation is she's a new friend of mine, but she's already one of my favorite people to talk to. Shannon O'Connor is an associate marriage and family therapist with HearYou.org. How are you doing, Shannon?
I'm doing good. It's good to be here again.
Really good to have you back. Let's get into this topic if you don't mind. I want to start out talking about public systems. They often respond as if the terms mental health crisis and danger to self and others were one and the same. How would you define the term mental health crisis?
I think it's interesting that they do make them one and the same. I will say that a mental health crisis is not the same thing as like a mental health emergency. I think a mental health crisis is more a situation where a person puts themselves at risk for hurting themselves, hurting other people, or they just don't have the capacity to take care of themselves. And I think a mental health emergency would be if someone's life, whether it be that person or someone else that they are going to harm, is in like imminent danger.
Mm,
That's the
mm.
difference.
And you sounded like you used a few terms that rolled off of your tongue. Imminent danger means
Like they are
something
real,
could
it's
happen
going to
really
happen soon.
really soon. Yeah.
Yeah.
So got it. Really appreciate that. I'm wondering what are some of the stressors or situations that can lead to a mental health crisis?
Well, the short answer to that is any kind of major change. Any major change can lead to some type of crisis, especially if you're not ready for it and it's disruptive. That looks like increased stress at work or at home. Physical and possibly a debilitating illness would cause a crisis. A change in like the family dynamic. Maybe there's a divorce. Maybe someone left. Or like trauma or violence, something like that.
Yeah, yeah. A lot
Yeah.
of stuff then can cause a mental health crisis. How about relocation? I would
Yeah.
think that might cause one.
Yeah.
Um, I'm thinking about maybe youth. How about school performance or if grades aren't what they're supposed to be?
It
Losing a
it could.
job. What do you think?
Yeah.
All
If
of
you don't
that. Wow.
yeah, if you're the sole provider and you lose a job, that's a major crisis.
Yeah, yeah, and we all need to look out for those. And that's a great list because most of us can relate to one of those situations. It's not always, abuse of drugs or abuse of alcohol. It's things that we deal with every day. It could be a medication. If a medication you're taking causes some type of adverse effect, that could cause a crisis in a household. Do you think?
That that as well. Also, um, if we go back to the substance abuse or the alcohol abuse, I believe that would contribute to a crisis if things blow up and then relationships aren't the same. That could cause a crisis as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I apologize up front, Shannon. We don't often have, whenever we have a mental health clinician like you, we try to take advantage of that. So sorry, I've got so many questions for you, but we want to get this information straight to help families out who, hopefully will never have to deal with that household in crisis, but we know that a lot of them do. So we appreciate it. Appreciate
Okay.
it. There's a mistaken assumption, I think, that families and especially parents are to blame when a child experiences rather a mental health emergency. We often will say, what happened to the child? What did the parent do or what didn't they do? Can you please help us lay that whole fallacy to rest so that parents can kind of let themselves off the hook about a mental health issue that one of their children or someone in their care might be dealing with?
Okay. First, I want to say that I believe that parents can teach a child coping skills that can deal with a lot of different stressors. So that's neither here nor there if it comes to a crisis. A crisis is something that's seriously disruptive in a person's life. And that has more to do with the environment than it does with a person or with a person's parents. That could be, like you said before, it could be like school grades. It could be being bullied at school. It could be a pandemic where you're isolated at home and you don't get
Mm,
to see your friends. It could be the violence that we've seen lately in school. It could be a lot of different things. It's not always a parent that
mhm.
causes the problem.
Why do you think, before we pivot to the next question, why do you think that is? As you were talking about that, it seems so obvious to me that parents wouldn't have anything to do with that. And we've talked about a lot at Brother Be Well that mental health issues are often simple brain chemistry issues. It's like we
Sometimes.
have a, yeah, one of our nurses, or all of them actually, we partner with the Capital City Black Nurses Association, but one in particular is great at reminding us that health doesn't stop at the neck. And just as you take care of your heart, your cardiovascular system, your bones, your all of your organs, you eat right, so you got nutrition, that health goes above the brain as well. And if something's off with the chemistry of your brain, it's going to manifest in some way. But somehow parents got the brunt of that, I think, early on. I'm just curious, why do you think that is? Why do we want to blame parents for something like that?
I think if it has anything to do with a child, they always just, you immediately go to a parent because the parent is the person that's supposed to take care of the child and make sure that they're okay. But I,
Yeah.
I think people just don't realize that. I think it's the lack of understanding of what mental illness is. And if they, if we were more educated about it, then they'd have a better understanding of sometimes it really isn't the parent's fault. Sometimes it does have to do with brain chemistry.
Yeah.
And sometimes
Yeah.
it has to do with things that children aren't even telling their parents.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a lot that can be going on, and that's what Brother Be Well is all about. And you're doing such fantastic work in the community. We're trying to get as much education, as much information as we can out there about all of these issues. Let's talk about warning signs of a pending mental health crisis. They're not always around. They're not always so obvious. Sometimes they are. I'm curious, from your perspective, an associate marriage and family therapist, what are some of the potential warning signs that there's a pending mental health crisis?
Um, Isolation would be one. And that's if they're willingly withdrawing from social interactions with people, even in the family. If they're stuck in their room and all they're doing is listening to music, that's a big sign. Not just music, but whatever they do in their
Hmm.
rooms.
Hmm.
Um, Irritability, agitation, if it comes out of nowhere, if they're swinging from being extremely irritable to being happy to being extremely irritable, there might be an issue going on there. Um, Change in sleep patterns is a big one. If they sleep too much, it could be an issue. If they're not sleeping at all, it can definitely be an issue. Um, Somatic symptoms, if they're talking a lot about having stomach problems or if they're having headaches, those can be like an expression of something else that's going on mentally and they're just manifesting it physically. If they're expressing like overwhelming pain or hopelessness or worthlessness, or if they're talking about not being here anymore, that's a big one. If they're talking about what would life be like if I wasn't here, how would you guys get along without me? That's a big one.
Yeah, and we're going to get into that specific one a little bit later. It sounded like a common thread, and I'm notorious for trying to find those in these conversations. Would you say that a change in behavior generally? So you said if a stomach problem comes up, if they start to become withdrawn. So if we all know our children or the people in our care, if you see a behavior that's radically different from what they used to be like or used to exhibit, that might be a sign that there's something going on.
I do want to like warn you that sometimes it just might be hormones too.
Yeah.
kids grow up and things
Yeah.
change.
Well,
But if it's drastically different, then yes.
and I'm glad you said that, because depending on the age, and we're Brother Be Well serves 12 and up, and that so that pre-adolescent time frame, you could see some changes that are radically different. Our
Yeah,
teenagers
and
don't
those are
always
actually
look like our
normal.
children.
So
Yeah, yeah. They don't always feel normal, but but they're normal. I appreciate that. Appreciate that. What are some of the steps, Shannon, that someone could take to help de-escalate a mental health crisis? And I just learned that term, de-escalation. We did a session on immediate steps that can be taken. Holds placed on people, involuntary admission to mental health facilities. And that's where I learned that term, de-escalation, and a lot of our Brother Be Well family did as well. What are some of the steps that someone in a household could take that could potentially de-escalate a mental health crisis?
I love that question. Um, I went to a seminar where they were talking about just de-escalating people, and the person that was talking said something that has stayed with me to this day. And this was maybe 4 years ago. He said, in that moment, you need to completely take yourself out of the equation. It is no longer about you. It is not about you at all. This is about that person. And what you need to do is think, what does this person need right now? So that's the first thing that you want to do when you're de-escalating anything, is completely do not take anything personal and focus on what they need. And then you want to, it sounds very weird, but this is the only way that I can remind myself to do it, is to get low. So if you're talking to somebody shorter than you want to make sure that you're eye level with them. And I don't know if that means that you need to bend. I don't know if that means you need to squat, if you need to lean on a wall or something, just so you're eye level with them. And that way you don't feel like you're towering over them and causing them more stress. You want to keep your tone neutral. You don't want to engage in any arguments. You don't want to engage in any like challenging things. It's not about you. So it doesn't matter if they're challenging you. You know what I mean? And you want to be on their level, find out what they need, put yourself in their place, find out what they need.
Those are such powerful suggestions. And I love these talks because I always hear something that I wouldn't have thought about, Shannon. Getting on, you said be on their level, and you were just talking about emotionally at the end, but you even talked about getting on their physical level when we're
Yes.
dealing with children. And I could imagine, yeah, if you're 6, 7, 8 years old, and you're looking up at somebody that's towering over you as you're dealing with a crisis, that can be scary.
Yeah.
That's going to exacerbate whatever symptoms they're dealing with. That is so powerful. Such a great tip. Really appreciate it. What are some of the other steps, early steps, that you can recommend to a family that's responding to a crisis in their home? So, what are some of the very early things that someone could do?
I think being open to communication and being ready to have uncomfortable conversations about uncomfortable feelings. I think children are afraid that they're feeling negative or they're feeling negative emotions, and they're afraid to bring that to their parents because they think their parents only want to see them happy. But being able to just say, okay, this is how you're feeling right now, let's talk about it, I think that normalizes negative feelings, and it helps them to be less conflicted about it, and it doesn't cause that much overwhelming emotion to arise when you're talking about what's going on with you.
Hmm.
I don't know if that makes sense. Does that make
It
sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. It does make sense. I don't know that, maybe I'm just revealing my own limitations as a parent. I don't know that that was always easy for me to do when I'm looking back to when my kids were little. How do you have any tips as a marriage and family therapist? How can you ease into that, or how can we get comfortable doing that? I don't think it's something that all of us are comfortable doing.
you have to
Maybe I'm
you
wrong.
have to you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's kind of the point. And letting
Yeah.
people and letting your kids know that, hey, you're not going to always be happy, and I understand that. So, but when you're upset, I kind of want to know that too, because I think with at least the way that I grew up, it was like either you're happy or you're silent. Like, I don't want to hear about any anger, and it, that's very unhealthy. So if you have a household that's like, okay, I accept your anger, I accept when you're frustrated, we can talk about stuff, we can have an open communication, we can work these problems out. It makes it a whole lot easier to accept the negative and uncomfortable emotions that you have.
Hmm. And we can all be, I love what you had to say there. We can all be angry, we can all be frustrated, we can all be scared.
Yeah.
I would think a child going through a mental health issue, they might not know how to articulate that, but they're terrified,
Yeah.
probably. And of course, as a parent, I can relate to that. I'm terrified, and I there is some power to just acknowledging, you know what, we're both scared here, but I've got your hand and I've got your back, and we're going to both work through this together.
Yeah. And I think having that conversation with an adult is actually what's going to teach them how to articulate that stuff. I mean, if you don't know the words for how you're feeling and like all you know is just when you're talking to your parent about that and you say then they can go, oh, that's frustration. Now you know what it is. And it makes it just makes it relaxes them and lets them know, hey, there is a name to this. Like this is okay. This is normal.
Yeah, yeah. I so wish there had been someone around like you when I was raising my kids. Let me just say that. I think it would have been a lot easier for them, and I know it would have been easier on them, and it probably would have been easier on me. So I just really want to thank you for your expertise and for sharing.